Cheers.
Oh, sorry. Dora and Aaron.
Aaron.
She's back soon.
Fashionably late.
Try one more time, Katie, louder.
Hi, Christina. Can you hear me?
Oh, Christina's on.
Great. Can you just turn your mic on so we can do a quick sound check?
Christina.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's there. 5.
Okay.
6. We're 6. 1, 2.
Yep.
3, 4, 5. Where's the 6?
No, we're not on
6.
6.
One,
Oh, 2. Laura, Christina. Christina Reed.
3 and council.
Yeah.
Not the CFO, but I can do that one.
As soon as she's hooked.
There I am. Okay, I can.
That's great.
I can
Thank
hear
you
you.
so
You
much.
can hear me too.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, where do I need to go? All good? All right, thank you. Welcome. I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Culture Environment Advisory Committee for November the 2nd to order. First item of business is adoption of the agenda. Moved by Michael, Matthew, seconded by John, all in favor, carried. We have some minutes. I assume everyone's taking a look at those minutes of September 7th. Any additions, errors, anyone? So motion to accept those minutes would be in order. Thank you, Steve and John. All favor, carried. Let's just move right on to reports. 6.1, we have 2 reports today. I suspect the second one is going to pique more interest than the first, but they're both important. And Melissa's the presenter on both. So Melissa, take it away on tree protection bylaw amendment. Welcome here.
Is this really tree products? Can I move this a little bit?
That's the first on the agenda, yeah. Okay.
So maybe just as a reminder, Melissa Price is our manager of Parks Planning, so she oversees that division in the Parks Recreation and Culture Department. She's going to be leading or steering us through both these presentations today with the help of a few of her colleagues.
Yeah, so I'm happy to be here. We're talking about the tree protection bylaw update in this presentation. And actually, I will just be kind of introducing it and then introducing Amelia in a moment, who's our consultant that will be taking you through the remainder of the presentation. So basically for today's agenda, we're going to just talk a little bit on the background and project context for those who might not be familiar with what we've been doing in recent years on the urban forest strategy and the tree bylaw update. And then the bulk of it, though, we'll get into the discussion where we'll kind of look at regulatory tools that can be used for managing trees in a community, Abbotsford specific bylaw, and then the bulk of it, basically where we are now, is exploring options, what we're looking at as far as updates for the tree protection bylaw. And that's the bulk of what we want to kind of get your feedback and thoughts on as we go through this presentation. So really, the comments we receive from this committee are going to help us refine, as well as through the next stages of our strategic advisory that we'll also be going through before we kind of refine all of these ideas and bring them back to council, with the idea that in the new year we'll go out to general public consultation on some of these ideas. So we are in stage 2, background research. A bulk of that was sort of carried forward from the work that was done previously on the urban forest strategy, which council endorsed in March 2022. And then we kind of updated some of that information and bring it forward into this process. So we're really here in stage 2, which is the exploring options. Like I mentioned, we've met with council, we're meeting with city committee, we'll be meeting next week with key stakeholders from the community representing different segments of development and arborists, forestry, sort of different people that would interface with this bylaw on a regular basis to get more feedback on sort of the approaches we're taking. Yeah, and so with that, I will introduce Amelia. She's a principal and senior forester with Diamond Head Consulting. She has a wealth of experience, over 15 years in the industry of working in a municipal setting, as well as in the consulting world, developing taking the lead on developing all sorts of strategic planning and technical documents around tree management in the Lower Mainland as well as Australia. And so they've walked us through the first step in creating our urban forest strategy, and so we're continuing that work with them to work on this bylaw. So I will turn it over to Amelia to take over the rest of the presentation. And then at the end, we definitely want to have discussion. If there's questions, we can talk about that.
Welcome, Reed.
Hi everyone. It's great to be here and following up from our work on the urban forest strategy several years ago, moving into tree bylaw updates. So just to provide a bit of that broader context and where the urban forest strategy sits, certainly that project was guided by the higher level plans and processes of the municipality. And this tree protection bylaw update itself is guided by the urban forest strategy and a set of actions within that spoke specifically to the update. As Melissa mentioned, it was adopted in 2022, and it provided a number of actions that spoke specifically to these updates. Also recognising through that process of developing the urban forest strategy that the current tree protection bylaw is dated, and it doesn't have the sort of range of tools necessary to implement the urban forest strategy and meet the broader goals for tree protection and replacement in the municipality. So just thinking in a more general sense, we also want to acknowledge that tree preservation and tree replacement isn't just driven by tree protection bylaws. There are higher level tools such as the OCP and the strategy that really set the tone for land use across the municipality, and also for values related to tree protection and tree replacement. And then also very influential are tools that regulate land use. So the zoning bylaw, the development bylaw, they really drive how the land is going to be allocated in terms of building coverage, in terms of road widths, in terms of boulevards, and where there's going to be space in landscapes for trees. So we can't look at the tree bylaw in isolation of these things. We have to be aware of those broader constructs, because a tree bylaw cannot prevent permitted use and density from occurring on a lot. And then for the trees themselves, the tree protection bylaw and development permits really come into play for regulating when trees are protected, how they'll be protected, and when they are removed, how they'll be replaced. So the urban forest strategy was built around 5 high-level goals focused on the sort of planning, the integration of planning and policy in terms of urban forestry, the preservation of trees, the management of public trees for health and safety, how we're going to grow the urban forest, so where we're going to be prioritising that growth, and then on partnering, because much of the urban forest isn't on public land, it's also on private land. There are a range of partners that we need to work with in order to implement the urban forest strategy. And there were 55 actions that came out of that plan, and 6 of those speak directly to the tree management bylaw updates. And just briefly to cover those, so that the strategy recommended that we update and create a new recommended tree species list. So that's thinking about climate adaptation and ensuring that people are choosing appropriate trees for the spaces that exist across the city. Also that we update the bylaw to align with the targets that were set and to strengthen tree protection and replacement tools for trees on private land. And then to create a significant tree nomination process. So the current bylaw does have a schedule for significant trees, but it's been an empty schedule. So the idea there being to create a process that could actually populate that schedule in the tree bylaw. And then in general, we set some targets. So by 2045, we've set a target for the city to maintain canopy cover of 40%. So that is in the urban and rural areas, but excluding the ALR. And then within the urban development boundary, we set a sub-target that canopy cover should be higher than 25%, and no single neighbourhood should be less than 20%. We also set a target for public land so that on the city's own properties, public land cover should exceed 30%. In terms of priorities for where that canopy cover needs to grow, we established that the priority should be in those communities or neighbourhoods that currently have less than 20% canopy cover. And we also established a recommendation that stocking level target of 60 trees per hectare should be set for new developments. And just to give you a sense of what 60 trees per hectare looks like in the landscape, it equates to approximately 40% canopy cover at maturity, and that's assuming an average tree size of about 8 by 8 metres. So we're talking about a medium-sized tree at maturity to large tree. So essentially, at a 60 tree per hectare rate, we would anticipate that 40% canopy cover can be achieved. In this example, we are showing an example from Abbotsford where that 40% canopy cover has been achieved with development through retention. So there are concentrated areas of canopy, and then within the development itself, there isn't a lot of landscape. But just to also show you some other examples of how this is achieved, a few examples from Vancouver. It's a good example because it does have mature tree canopy in general. So in some cases, in high density environments, the tree canopy cover can be achieved through landscaping of the communal areas in developments, coupled with public realms, so having good standards for replacement of street trees, trees in parking lots and so on. In medium density, in this example, there is some of the canopy provided on that communal open space in the centre, but really we're seeing the public realm in this particular example is where canopy cover is concentrated to achieve that 40%. And then in this low density example, the canopy is much more diffused. You're seeing a lot of tree canopy is on the private landscapes in yards, and there's space for that as well. We're having good canopy cover in streets. So recognising that 40% canopy cover is achieved through development on both the private land as well as the public or land or retention areas. It has to be a combination of outcomes to achieve 40%. So in the current bylaw, the bylaw currently applies everywhere except on lands that are in the ALR or under active forest management. It regulates trees greater than 20 centimetres. However, those trees in general can be removed with, there's very few reasons why the city could refuse removal in the tree bylaw. But when trees are removed, they must be replaced, and the current replacement ratio ranges from 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. There is a higher level of protection for trees that are in retention areas. So those currently are significant trees, although they're undefined, trees in spears, trees under covenants, and trees that are shown as retained on development drawings. So those trees are a different class of protected tree. The city can refuse removal except for reasons of health, safety, nuisance, or permitted use or density. When those trees are approved for removal, the same replacement ratios apply as on the previous slide. So what are the updates being considered? In general, there's two broad categories of updates. There's updates that are a major influence, so these are updates that would have a significant impact on how trees are retained and replaced compared to present. And then there's updates related to administrative best practices. So these are updates that really are about getting the bylaw to operate more smoothly and bring it into alignment with current best practices. So clarity, consistency, conformity, those types of updates to definitions, improving arborist report standards, things like that, that are not going to really have a big impact in general on the outcomes of tree retention and replacement. And so the major influence ones are really what we're focusing on for engagement and feedback, because they will change those regulations and have a big impact on how things are done. So in terms of the administrative best practices updates, we're going to be looking at reporting information, and particularly the standard of arborist reports, the way that hazard tree assessments would be accepted, and wind throw assessments. Also looking at where it's necessary to clarify definitions, so things like providing a better definition of what tree damage is. So in the case of violations, that's very clear. Clarifying tree protection zones and the measures that are required for tree protection on construction sites. We'll also be updating that replacement tree species list and the penalties to align with the current standards that are allowed. In terms of the major influence outcomes, one of them will be the protection of significant trees. So this will be defining either a process or a class of significant tree that would populate that schedule. And then looking first at introducing that for public trees. So that would be sort of a test method of testing the process and then expanding that process out to private land. Now, those trees would have a higher class of protection, and what that would effectively mean is that in order for them to be removed from the schedule and permitted for removal, they would have to be approved by council for removal first, and then they would be able to be issued a permit. In terms of tree protection securities, we're also looking at essentially providing a financial security for tree protection. So if a tree is retained, there is an amount held. And the reason for doing that is that it's a mechanism for ensuring that tree protection measures are followed. Otherwise, we often see that damage occurs and then there's very little means to either compensate for the tree that was lost or require mitigation to repair the damage that occurred. Another change would be expanding the definition of what constitutes a tree and therefore is protected. So we would be looking at reducing below 20 centimetres the size of protected trees in environmentally sensitive and steep slope areas. We'd also be looking to protect trees that were replacement trees. So currently trees are only protected once they're 20 centimetres. There isn't protection for trees that are planted as a requirement of replacement. So we would be adding that. We'd also be including city tree protection, and similarly to replacement trees, any yard trees required with subdivision, we'd also be looking at essentially treating them the same way as replacement trees and protecting them. We also want to explore changing the replacement ratios so that more replacements are required for very large trees and that one-to-one replacement can be allowed for trees that are smaller in environmentally sensitive areas, or when a replacement tree has to be replaced, that it can be replaced at one-to-one. And we also want to look at lowering replacement if essentially incentivizing people to plant trees that are going to be large at maturity, giving them a credit, saying you don't have to replace as many because you're choosing a species that is going to be large at maturity. And then also allowing sapling and seedling replacements. So typically replacement trees have to be a minimum caliper size of 4 to 6 centimetres, quite expensive trees. But recognising that in some circumstances, such as natural areas, it might be more appropriate to plant seedlings. Better survival rates, more affordable. And we'll also be looking at the current standards for sort of measuring diameter at breast height. This is sort of the methods by which we identify whether a tree is 20 centimetres or not. Another area we're looking at is for city-owned trees specifically. So currently the process would be that you just had to have the same sort of replacement ratio applied for city trees, but most cities actually get compensation for the trees that are removed when it's for a private benefit. So in that case, the applicant would have to pay the cost of purchasing, planting and maintaining that replacement tree. Typically that's at least an $800 cost for cities. But as well, when the tree is very large or of a significant size or amenity to the community, lots of cities also apply an appraisal method to get a compensation amount, quite a sizable compensation amount for that tree. And that has two effects. One is to allow that compensation and to really improve, the outcome of the replacement that the city can afford. And the other is to also deter the ease with which people might otherwise remove city trees. Because once they have a higher value associated with them, it might make more sense to work around that tree, even though it's a slightly higher cost. And then, as mentioned, we're looking at that 60 tree per hectare approach. So that is what's called a tree density target approach, and it can perform a range of different functions. So one function it can perform is to cap replacement. So for example, if a heavily forested property was removing a lot of large trees and we had a 6-to-1 replacement ratio, there could be hundreds of replacements required on that property. But if we can use the tree density target as a cap and essentially say, well, if you're replacing up to that cap, we're not going to require 100 replacements, we're going to require 40 replacements. It can also be used to require a minimum level of tree planting. So, for example, through a landscaping requirement that a development must plant at least 60 trees per hectare, whether or not they were removing trees, it's sort of not related to removal and replacement. And then another way it could be used is in terms of applying to the rural areas. So a lot of the rural area properties are heavily forested, so there could be a provision that allowed flexibility for a certain number of removals each year, recognising that people have a lot of trees to manage, but essentially preventing clear cutting from occurring by setting this sort of bottom threshold of 60 trees per hectare. And then sort of last but not least, looking at how we can incentivise tree retention. So, for example, providing tree replacement credits for retention of large trees on site, or other mechanisms by which people could be encouraged and rewarded for taking the effort to retain and protect trees successfully. So in terms of the next steps, Melissa covered this already. We're going to go out to sort of for feedback from the technical community. There'll also then be a council review of the refined bylaw options. Once we've received input, we will refine these options and then bring them to council. And then we would go to community consultation from that point before we move into drafting the bylaw. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Very thorough. Committee, table, questions, comments?
Everyone's looking at me. Yes.
Start us off, John.
Sure. Thanks so much. That was great. And I appreciate that we've been trying to update this tree bylaw for a very long time. And it's long overdue. And I think the process is right in terms of developing a strategy first and then following up with a tree bylaw update. So thank you. But I do have a couple of questions in terms of compliance, voluntary compliance in rural areas. It's going to be a real challenge. Mm-hmm. I don't quite know how we're going to achieve this. It's almost by necessity, it will be voluntary. Mm-hmm. And the rural areas tend to understandably resist these kinds of efforts. So I think something should be, there should be some kind of a way to communicate this within the tree bylaw itself, that compliance has value. And perhaps one of the ways to do that would be recognizing that when a rural landowner takes down trees, they affect their neighbor's property as well. Mm-hmm. And again, I've been on committees on Sumas Mountain where we've talked this over with neighborhood organizations, and somebody clears some land for horses and right up to their property line, and then there's several, perhaps as much as 20 or 30 meters into, or even 40 meters into the neighboring property, the trees are affected, and we have trees falling down and wind damage and things like that. Is that what wind throw is?
That's right.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So I see that terminology is there, but it's not defined. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it would be better if it was defined and understood, particularly in rural applications. People recognize that when you cut trees down on your property, it's not a right, it's a privilege. And particularly when it affects a neighbor, right? And I think that would help if that was communicated properly. I think we had an attempt, perhaps a decade ago, to do some planning for Sumas Mountain, some visionary planning for Sumas Mountain that Dave can remember. Mm-hmm. It backfired horribly, and I don't want to see that happen again. I would love to see this bylaw update reflect the forest canopy in the rural areas and recognize the value of that forest canopy, not just in ecological goods and services, but in quality of life and all of those sorts of things. So I would like to see something to that effect, some wording to that effect in the bylaw that recognizes those issues. Yeah. Otherwise, it's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
I
Matthew.
had two questions. One was like both of your examples, the one on Whatcom shows, I think, an area that has like geotechnical concerns, so that's why there was like high tree coverage there. And then the Vancouver example, it's like anything with medium density housing is on public land. Like they have those big beautiful maple trees on both sides of the road. Is there sort of a distinction between different levels of density and whose responsibility it is? Just because it seems like in Vancouver, the responsibility is more on the public to meet that tree cover requirement. It's just like council hasn't said no to a building project for like, I don't know, two years at least, and now we have even more pressure because the provincial government's sort of forcing that 7,000 new dwellings in 5 years or something. So is there sort of a distinction between the level of density and the tree bylaw?
Good Chair, that's an excellent point, and I think really also speaks to the fact that we're looking at the tree bylaw, but there are those other land use tools that are also very important for us to consider. Because once you do reach a certain density, the opportunity for greening on private land is different. You may not be able to retain ground for trees, you might be planting on structure. So a few communities are approaching that in a few different ways. So one is through the landscaping standards, which can look at green infrastructure, other sort of higher forms of greening that can be accommodated on a high density development, but also recognising that the standard of servicing in terms of public trees and boulevards needs to be higher when you've got a very high density development. So we would have to be looking at other tools and options to ensure that outcome was occurring. But ideally, there would be contribution from that development to improve the streetscape or meet the standard of the streetscape that's required for that form of development.
And through the chair, just I really appreciated that number figure of like $800 per tree kind of thing. Like that gives a good idea. For the significant trees, it's sort of like the bylaw has gone from like, okay, you can do whatever, to like applying to council actually seems like thermonuclear option. Like how long is that wait list and that process? Is it even possible kind of thing? Do you have any comments on that?
Through the chair, yeah. So, and I guess I would ask too. Well, yes. So that significant tree bar would be very high. So do you also mean that we sort of need something in the middle?
Well, it's just like I'm not sure like the wait list or like how long that would take. Would that if there was going to be a development going through, like would that be an extra year sort of waiting, or how would that sort of work, or would that just be on their development plan?
I think Ms. Price might be well positioned to answer this.
Maybe just to add to that, I think that's why we were looking at perhaps introducing this on public lands initially and so we typically aren't having a lot of need to remove trees on public land as much as on private land. So I think the idea is let's introduce this to the community, then perhaps we then take a look at how this might roll out on private lands, and maybe through this process and through the public consultation process we can explore what that could look like. Is it a nomination process? Is it an assessment process where we assess trees across the city? So I think there's different ways that it can be approached, but you're right. What does that process look like if it does require a council approval to remove it? Is it a whole process, and what does that process look like? I think those are some of the things we have to consider and that we'll be probably looking at before we bring some of the refined ideas back to council.
I think the other piece I'd maybe just chime in on, and this is a good example of a lot of staff discussion we've had, that this is not a static bylaw that isn't going to get changed for 20 years, kind of like the one we have now, right? We're conscious that, if we overcorrect in some way, shape, or form, and it becomes a bit of a burden in other areas of the community, that we need to adapt to that accordingly. So we're pretty mindful of that as a team in terms of, hey, let's make sure we're not just, putting this in place and not reviewing it on a regular basis.
Regarding the tree species list, trees that are more appropriate to our environment, I was thinking about our children's own street where they live here in Abbotsford, where a whole street, the trees had left a mess. They were fairly new, but they all had to be replaced because they were inappropriate. And so I really applaud this idea. My question is, I guess through the staff, would such a list be distributed throughout to the community as well, so that private landowners in the city would be made aware of what is appropriate and what is less appropriate for this environment?
I mean, I think the idea is that this list would either be appended as a schedule to the bylaw, so it would be available as part of that bylaw itself. Some of those lists have already been developed through some of our development permit guidelines for some of the neighborhood plans. There's been sort of lists, so part of this will be kind of making sure that the lists are speaking to each other. But I think that's also part of the implementation of the new bylaws, to get some materials on the website, some information guides, and certainly linking to that information so that people are aware. Even if they're wanting to just plant trees in their yard outside of a permit process, and they just want to know what trees might be more suitable for the sort of existing climate, then yeah, it would be available for people to use in that way.
John?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, our Fraser Valley Conservancy has an education program. Oh, we had a question?
No, go ahead, John.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
We have an education program on plantings. We plant thousands of trees and on appropriate trees and trees addressing drought and climate change issues and so on. I've got like 800 Western red cedars right now looking for a home, and we turn people down all the time saying, you don't want to plant a Western red cedar in your backyard in an urban neighborhood because it's inappropriate, right? It'll grow to be 50 meters tall and take up the entire lawn. So that's really important. I agree that information should be publicly available and encouraged. Yeah, thank you.
Thomas, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I got two comments basically coming from, I'm on a strata council for a residential complex. One would be a good idea to list maybe city approved or at least city licensed arborists. I mean, it's really hard to find and verify who knows these rules. Because yeah, we had same thing, all our trees died in our new complex. And I'd also really be excited about the incentives you guys have, because getting our own tenants to water trees is really, really difficult. We had to fight our developer to get water even to our place, so making sure that's a bylaw would be a good idea too.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Was your hand up over there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, through the chair, to the question about the species list. We've currently begun revising the species list. Of course, we get asked all the time when folks are doing replacement trees with their current permits, what would you recommend? So we have refined our list. Thankfully, we've got somebody in the room here who did a lot of work on climate adapted lists with Vancouver's climate adaptation toolbox, I believe. And so we're drawing from that existing information, refining it with Diamond Head, but we've got an interim list available for people when they ask.
Cool. Christine? Yes.
I just wanted to reiterate the whole idea of making a list available with arborists that are approved by the city. The last time I had to have a tree cut down, and I lived in Abbotsford, we had a large green space in the back of our yard. And we had some trees that needed to come down because they were taking the hill with them. We were able to go directly to the city's arborist, but we don't have one of those, I think, anymore that we can go to. So I think that would be really important so that people would be aware of where to go with their questions. And in other communities, before you cut a tree down, it's the city arborist that you have to apply to get a permit to take down a tree. So I think it'd be important that people would be aware of who they're supposed to ask for, guidance for these kinds of things.
Right, thank you. Yes.
So it's just going to chime in, and thanks for the feedback, because you're right. I mean, you can go and buy some magnets and stick them on the side of my truck and say tree service and whatnot. But I think there might be a good opportunity, Sean, maybe to kind of talk about how an arborist gets certified. But clearly we need to do more promotion on this, because there is kind of industry standards on that, so.
Certainly, there is a certification process to become a certified arborist, and you need at least 3 years of relevant experience before you can even apply to challenge the exam. And then you have to attain continuing education units every 3 years to recertify and maintain that certification in good standing without having to retest completely. On top of that, we have tree risk assessor qualifications. You have to be an arborist first to challenge your tree risk assessor qualification. So those are two certifications and qualifications that we look for as a starting point. Now, as in any profession, there are going to be huge variations in the professionalism and abilities of those arborists. It's difficult as a city to recommend or not recommend businesses. We could get singled out pretty quickly for not recommending certain people over others. So we would have to have a very strict set of criteria if we were going to go that route. What we currently do is we make ourselves available if we have the time, which is becoming less and less frequent. We will attend sites and provide free advice to homeowners. That is almost not an option for us anymore under our current workloads, though, and volumes of permits. So now what we do is we receive phone calls. We welcome calls to our urban forestry section at any time, which we will provide at least basic arboricultural information, and then we will provide what we call known arborists to us, people who we do business with a lot. Not necessarily preferred, but we do business with them a lot, and we've had good experiences with them is kind of how we parlay it to our public, to try and avoid that favoritism that we could get labeled with by referring some folks over others.
And that governing body is the International Society of Arboriculture, is that correct?
Correct.
And they keep a database of certified individuals.
They do, and we have a code of ethics that we are to follow, but it's not policed actively. It would be looked into if reported.
No. Okay. So perhaps a clear opportunity for us to promote that a little bit more with the ISA, and that we can work on that.
Great. It's been good discussion.
Well, just one last
go,
comment.
John.
As this goes ahead, we're obviously, if something like this were implemented, and it will be, I hope, then we're also going to have to look at a budget to follow up and make it work, so that there will be staff available to do this work as necessary. Once you've got the bylaw, you've got to be able to enforce it. If you can't enforce it, there's really no point in having a bylaw. And that would combine with education, of course, and voluntary compliance and encouragement in the community education, all those sorts of things. They require staff hours. So somehow that's got to work into the budget. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Understood. Yeah. Okay then. Thank you very much for that presentation. And do we need a motion to receive this? No.
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. All right then. Melissa, I'm going to call you up for the Mill Lake Park Master Plan Stage 2, exploring options. And my understanding, committee members, is that Melissa's report is a little on the longer side. But there are going to be opportunities to interrupt her as we go through to ask questions. So you don't need to reserve all your questions to the end. Correct, Melissa?
Yeah, I'm hoping that, I don't know how long it will be, it'll depend on how much
Sure.
we want to discuss each item, but I'm hoping that this will be a little bit more of a conversation as opposed to a presentation. So let me get started here. So really the purpose of being here today is to kind of pick up where we left off on September 7th when we presented the 3 concepts for the Mill Lake Park Master Plan, and it was a really tight agenda that day with a lot of items, so we really just didn't have time at the end to discuss. So with that, really today I'd like to just go over the survey results and then just take some time to discuss any feedback or comments that anyone had on the 3 concept plans as we go through it. And then really why we're here is that any of the feedback and sort of the comments we get on the 3 concept plans, we really want to take those and feed that into all of the feedback we have received so far through this public consultation and strategic advisory stage, so that we can refine all of those ideas into one preferred concept approach that we would then present to council before we launch into starting to draft the actual plan. So yeah, just continue. We're just still in stage 2 here, so we wrapped up the the last bit of the in-person public engagement, probably about 2 weeks ago. Our survey online, I believe, is closing at the end of the week. So we're really just wrapping up this stage of it, and then for the next number of months, we'll be analyzing everything that we've heard to try to kind of bring it into one kind of cohesive plan that we'll be able to present to council before we move forward. So in that September 7th, I'm not going to go over a lot, but I just to refresh your memories a little bit, in September 7th, we talked about having these 3 concepts and exploring these 7 big ideas a little bit differently within the 3 different concept plans. So those 7 big ideas were, creating space for community and culture, prioritizing broad public use of the park space, looking at parking, enhancing amenities throughout the park, enhancing the environmental elements of the park, upgrading the lake loop, and then improving the park entrances and edges. And those were sort of, again, explored in different ways in the 3 concepts. We also talked about the 3 concepts fitting sort of within this larger continuum of park categories. So on one end of the continuum, we might have a really urbanized park, and on the other end, we might have a nature park. And so these 3 concepts, that 1 active, 2 balanced, and 3 passive, sort of fit somewhere in that larger continuum. I've attached the concept plans here. I'm not going to go through them. I put them here for the purpose of if we want to refer to them at any point. If there's a question or for a discussion item, I can click back to them. But really, I'd like to just walk through the survey questions and the general results for those who were able to participate in the survey. And then maybe I'll just pause with each topic, and if there are further thoughts or questions or comments, I'll try to. I know Danielle isn't here today, but maybe Todd can record any kind of additional. Okay, great. Yeah, awesome. So for the first question in that survey, thank you to those who were able to participate. We were talking about the cultural center, this idea of whether Mill Lake is the appropriate location for sort of a new facility that would be something like a cultural or multi-purpose building. And for those who responded, there was full support on this concept. So I don't know, maybe I'll pause, and if people want to jump in or if there's questions or comments before we move to the next kind of topic, then we can kind of do it that way.
Just a moment. Just for Christine and Thomas who are online, we can't see your face at this point when the presentation is being made. So if you have a comment, just interject and say question, and then we'll pause. All right? Thank you.
Great, okay, so moving on to the next 2 slides, which is talking about event space. So in the various plans, we talked about, would the park be appropriate to sort of establish a permanent covered event space, as well as a temporary. And so the first question with respect to that, there was full support with this concept. With the second one, there was about 80% of respondents supported having more of an established, sort of slightly more formalized temporary but flexible event space.
Question on that. Any sense can you reflect what their hesitation was about a temporary flexible event space? I mean, the previous one is a permanent mixture. This is temporary. So I'm just curious why they would object to a temporary as opposed to a permanent.
Unfortunately, I didn't bring all of the responses with me.
If it was somebody who's present and they want to speak to that, that would be,
Okay, fair enough.
helpful. I mean, if not, I think the only thing I could speculate on, it's pure speculation, is somebody may be more in favor of a permanent than a temporary.
Well, I think 80% is significantly in favor of, so I don't,
Just to clarify, some of the questions didn't have room for elaboration. It was more support, not support. So in some cases, there might not have been reasons specified.
And then, through the chair, how many respondents were there?
There were 5.
5?
Yes.
Oh my. This online? Or
This was a separate survey that we designed specifically for the committee. So this wasn't the general public one.
Oh, I thought we were
this is just the committee.
general public one.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I thought it was just the general public.
I get it.
okay.
No,
It was a separate survey just for us.
Yeah,
so-
it was.
Oh.
For clarity, early on in the presentation, Melissa noted the committee survey. So if you recall, last meeting, we said we'll follow up, right? Committee received their own specific survey for feedback, right? Melissa's bringing those results for discussion and awareness. That's why my comment around, if it was somebody who's present, had a different thought about that flexible event space, we'd love to hear from them directly, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then also if obviously there was a little bit of misunderstanding around that, so if there were additional thoughts, like even people who participated in the survey, if you slept on it and you had more comments you wanted to add or more clarification around some of your comments, like we just want to kind of absorb as much of your feedback through this process as possible.
Okay, and just for full disclosure, I intentionally did not respond to it because I didn't want my council hat to skew the results of any feedback. I thought I needed to hear from the committee rather than from a council member. So I didn't respond to this.
Yeah, that's the same thing for me in terms of, like, I didn't want to be double dipping because of the, we're a key stakeholder for this process, and I've already answered all the same questions in the stakeholder meetings as well as in the, my staff has answered the online questions.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I did the online one too, rather than the, the
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a bit of misunderstanding.
Well, we're happy people are doing the survey one way or the other. We're thrilled with that, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so
Let's
great.
proceed.
So just any additional feedback or any clarity on any of these items is great, and if not, we'll just zip through them
Okay.
for information purposes. Okay, so moving on to the event space. I guess it was a question about, what kind of event space, what kind of events would you see appropriate for the park? What kind of events would you like to see in the park? And this is really getting around the idea of, like, if we are going to establish a permanent venue, what size should we be looking at? What kind of cap on event size should we be looking at? Because this informs things like infrastructure, also, ancillary infrastructure that would be needed in the park to support that, and potentially parking and things like that. So this was trying to get a lens on, what kind of events would be appropriate for the park. We have a couple of large events that happen now. Is that the size we should sort of be sticking with? Should we be trying to do something bigger, keeping it to smaller ones? That's really what was behind this question.
So my understanding, I see a permanent structure which has, but only the structure, only the stage is permanent. The seating is flexible, that is lawn chairs, out in the grass. That's what I'm seeing in my mind. So it could accommodate 2,000, it could accommodate 500, whatever.
Quick question about the swim meets. In some of the examples, there was, like, Centennial Pool was kept and some it wasn't. Do you have an idea of, like, is it running at a loss to the community, or just like there was the $1.1 million upgrade like a year ago or something? Is sort of the lifespan of that work, is that sort of 10 years, like 20 years? Like,
So, yeah, maybe I can chime in a response. So maybe to answer that last question first. That work, which is about 1.5 million, a little more, bought us kind of 5 to 7 years extended life on that. And then to go back to your first question around the pool and kind of as a revenue source, I will just generally say that there's a reason that public bodies provide pools, is because they are generally subsidized. I don't know of a pool in my experience that is a revenue generator, as in it's nets a profit for any operator. So they're quite expensive facilities to maintain, including the outdoor case. There's a lot of heat loss there and kind of the associated utility expenses. So.
But if I can add to that as well, we're engaging in aquatic strategy, and so any decision on the outdoor pool would be tied to the aquatic strategy, which would spell out the future in terms of, will we have a 50-meter indoor pool? If we will, well, certainly I think Centennial would be going. So that's how it's sort of tied together.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think that's a blanket statement for the amenities that are proposed for, not being located in the park in the future. We're not saying they don't exist in the community. Just harken back to September 7th, right? It's not they don't exist. They may just not exist in Mill Lake.
Okay, so the next topic was sort of this beach area, and this is currently in the north end of the park where we have that parking lot currently. So in all three plans, we look at removing that parking lot and kind of shifting it to just slightly east, so kind of out of the main park area. And so with that, there's an opportunity to kind of explore how we use that space. And in one of them, we talked about expanding the beach area One of them, we talked about really naturalizing that space back to sort of more riparian habitat. And then in one option, we talked about having it more of just like park, kind of park open space, kind of picnic area. And so there were really varying opinions amongst all of the respondents. There was no clear trend as to what the preference would be for this particular topic. Okay, the next couple of slides do talk about the walking loop. This is one of the major, I think, items, at least in my mind. It's the most valued activity at the park. It's the cherished loop around the lake. And so through this survey, both the public one as well as this one, we're really trying to nail down what people really value. So there's this idea of widening the lake loop in the first concept. And the idea behind that is, we could widen it out and make it definitely more accessible for all users. So for people walking, running, people on bikes, people on scooters, so sort of for all modes of people wanting to use the loop around the lake. And that would allow more flexibility and more just comfort in doing that. And then another plan, the other two kind of talk about keeping it at the same width and applying different sort of restriction levels for wheels on the loop. So, do we want to have a conversation around restricting bicycles or only restricting bicycles to a certain part of the path versus, allowing the lake loop to be open to all users? So this is really getting to some of those questions. And there were really varying opinions in this as well. There was no clear trend as to what people preferred in this respect. So I'd be actually curious if I could ask if there were thoughts on this. I would like to get a little more clarity around where people's minds are with this topic.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the asset, Mill Lake as an asset is unquestionable. We've got this great space. It's going to get used. It's going to get used a lot more and more and more as we densify our city. And we have to accommodate that. People are going to want to go there no matter what. And I think trying to eliminate or restrict certain activities on trails like that or paths like that is almost impossible to police again, right? So it'd probably be better just to create a space that's safe for everybody. So that would be widening it, much like they do in Vancouver. You've got a cycling lane, and you don't need a two-way cycling lane. You've got a cycling lane, and the cyclists will figure that out on their own. And then a walking lane. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be fine. I mean, too much control. I know from Holland, and whenever they do things like this in Holland, they take signage away altogether. And they find that people behave better if they have to sort it out on their own and respect each other, right? Rather than just follow the rules. So just creating a space that's good and safe is probably our best, in my opinion, our best option. And yeah, no matter what we do, a lot of people are going to be going there and more all the time. So you've got to accommodate them somehow.
Christine.
I'm thinking more about not so much as wheels as in bikes, but I think that one of the issues that we run into continuously down here at the park are kids on skateboards and adults on rollerblades and roller skates.
Sure.
They can't use the boardwalk, for example. You're not supposed to. They can. That's the problem, is that they do anyways. And so this is why I was interested in looking at this, because there are many parts of Abbotsford where you're not supposed to be on rollerblades, for example, and we know that we don't like longboards on certain streets and this, that, and the other thing. We do get them here quite a lot. The heritage site as such is sort of exempt from that. They're not supposed to be on their skateboards and stuff because they damage the infrastructure. But if you were to provide them with a space where they could rollerblade around the lake, for example, then they would stay off of those streets where we don't want them. So that's why I was really interested in actually in it, not so much like sectioning off the part for bikes and things like that, but in looking at ways that we can eliminate the boardwalks. And in terms of the boardwalks as well, they are a continuous cost to upkeep. it's got to be costing a lot of money for the city of Abbotsford to be maintaining the boardwalks. They bend and they warp and they lift and they do all kinds of weird things if you leave them for any more than 3 months at a time, right? So that's why I was considering that. And that I did put that through the stakeholder process, but I think it's important that you remember that it isn't just about bikes, it's about all of these other, scooters and things like that that people use too.
Good, thank you. Matthew?
And through the chair, the only thing worse than not having a bike lane is having a non-connected bike lane.
Yeah.
Because
Fragmented.
if I was 13, I'm wearing rollerblades, I'm not going to take off my rollerblades to walk on the boardwalk. And that's, even if there was like bylaw officers, I probably would. I wouldn't understand the consequences, but I really liked how sort of this sustainability aspect where the floating boardwalk was sort of changed to the walking trail. And so I like that in some of the proposals.
Yeah.
It was almost like an either or for the three options. You either had a floating boardwalk or you didn't have a floating boardwalk but you had a trestle kind of thing. Is there any options where it's just a walking trail and you don't have the trestle or anything?
So through the chair, maybe I can just go over the three, just for the walking trail. So in the active concept, this was where we were suggesting, let's widen out the pathway and then over the long term have it be entirely on the shore. And then in that scenario, it would not require the boardwalk to be sort of forming that connective loop. So in that scenario, the boardwalk would be removed. However, we did look at the idea of having sort of more of a pier coming out so people can still enjoy kind of being out on the water, looking out over the lake, seeing those views. But the pathway would be entirely on the shoreline in option one. And then in option two, I believe, I want to mix them up, but maybe I'll go back to those, we can just look at them. So in the balanced, so we do talk about the pathway staying, so that's the blue, that's the, that's the dark blue line that's being shown there around the lake. So in the option two, it does talk about the pathway staying largely at the same width in the same location. So the boardwalk would remain as the connective portion of that path. And then what's kind of shown here, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's this yellow line that kind of goes from Emerson through here and then connects into Mill Lake Road. And this is the scenario where we're saying, okay, the pathway is largely pedestrian oriented, but we're introducing this sort of like direct route through the park as more of a almost like commuter route or a direct route for where the pathway could be widened out so we could accommodate people biking through the lake and then connecting into sort of the external road biking network. So in this version, in two, it's largely in the exact same spot with the boardwalk, some version of the boardwalk retaining that looping sort of function. And then if we go into the third one, which is the passive, again, we're looking at that blue line. And so what this is showing is that we're keeping the lake loop essentially at the same width, but we are moving it onto that shoreline. So, in this one, we are kind of just looking at, a similar scenario where we would look at, the question of do we want to restrict wheels? And that would, for Christina's point, that would include all types of wheels potentially, whether they're skates or rollerblades or bikes. So it's asking the question, do we want to restrict those types of things? And if so, then perhaps we don't need to widen the path, but we would still look at an option of bringing it on shore just for those issues of the connectivity with the boardwalk and sort of the restrictions that the boardwalk has, and also just the long-term maintenance of the boardwalk.
It's just going to chime in as, again, a reminder, hearkening back to our September 7th discussion, kind of presentation, very brief discussion, is we're not going to be surprised as staff if the kind of next phase of this includes some hybrid solutions between some of the options. So again, not advocating for this or projecting my crystal ball too much into the future, but there might be an option where we're saying, okay, we're actually going to retain the boardwalk, and that's going to be for pedestrians, and we're going to have a land-based section of the pathway that is for those wheels. So like, I just don't want the committee to be kind of surprised around, we might be back at some in the future with some hybrid solutions here saying, hey, we heard from the community, there's a lot of interest in both these things, right? So, we're kind of coming back with a, a 1B or a 2C option or whatever it may be with some of those kind of ideas intertwined.
Just a question here.
Yeah,
Is there a particular reason to get rid of the boardwalk other than we don't want, we don't see a reason for it, or is there a giant cost to that or environmental impact?
So through the chair, there are a few different reasons. I mean, I guess the most obvious reasons are, number one, it's really not accessible. So where the boardwalk, because it fluctuates its elevation with the water levels of the lake, where it attaches on the sort of the north side and where it attaches to the shore on the more, I guess, east side or south side, we get continuous calls about people saying, when are you going to fix the boardwalk? Because those ramps that attach, they really are not accessible. Particularly the one on sort of like the southeast side that's really quite steep. So anyone with any kind of mobility challenge, even if they're not in a wheelchair, but they just have mobility issues, it is a barrier to that. It's an ongoing maintenance challenge that I also hear about from our operations crew. And then also it's, I guess those are really the main kind of reasons why we would want to look to putting it on shore. But the accessibility one is a big one in my mind.
Yeah, and I think this is just a piece around kind of doing right by the community going forward, whether it's on the shore or whether it's in the water. I think that focal point will be, if we're going to replace it, if the community wants that boardwalk, right, and we're going to replace it in the water, is addressing some of these concerns that we've heard from the community that our own staff have told us, and making sure that at some point in the future, 15, 20 years, we need to replace that, or longer, we need to replace that we do it in the proper way. So.
Keep in mind also that when you're looking at parents with strollers going around the lake, that boardwalk is awful when you have a single stroller, never mind a double stroller, and I've had both, and I can tell you that is not a good way to do it right now. So you're sort of limiting to the people that can visit, right? It's you're eliminating people in with mobility issues, and you're also limiting it to parents who are just going to go to one side of the lake because you can't get across that the boardwalk. And one question that I was thinking about that might come into play here too is that the lake is every year has to be cleaned up because of the invasive species that we have growing in the lake. It's really rather expensive and difficult to clear the boardwalk to get in and go after the lily pads and things like that are in behind the boardwalk. It causes a bit of an obstacle for the crew that has to clear that too. So that's another issue, I think, as well.
thank you. Proceed.
All right, so next question is really looking at this idea of lighting in the park. Should we have lighting in the park? Should we not have lighting in the park? And if we want to have lighting in the park, where would be the appropriate areas? Like for what purpose? And so there was general full support for the idea of having lighting in the park. And then there were some different thoughts about what areas of the park should be lit if we were going to go with that route. And so some of those ideas were here. I don't know if there were any further thoughts on lighting.
Well, I'm in full support, of course, of lighting, but and I'm sure that the city as well would be looking at appropriate lighting that wouldn't glare up into the sky and destroy the night sky and so on. We've got too much of that already, so it would have to be directed lighting.
Right.
Is there, or through the chair, is there options that would prevent theft? Like I know at Elwood Lake, there's big posts for lighting posts, but there's no, people have sort of taken all the wires out. So is there sort of a better way to do the lighting?
Lockable access points.
Maybe I'll answer that based on some park operations experiences. I don't know that there is a foolproof system. I think there are some substantial improvements that have been made over the course of time. again, my experience is if somebody wants to get in, they're bound and determined to get in on that.
Make it, yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes the more secure you make it, the less appealing you make it, and you know, from an aesthetic and visual standpoint. So it's kind of reaching that balance point, and yeah. But again, all those other pieces, the activity in the park. I mean, one of the things I always say is, you know, the more active the park is, the less riskier it's going to be, because you know, people are going through on their bikes or you know on foot or whatever it may be, or playing a ball game and whatnot. You know, less time for people to get up to things that, you know, as a community we don't want them getting up to. So.
All right, so now we get into feedback on the 3 concept plans themselves. So really the question was, what are your favorite, elements of concept 1, and same with 2 and 3. And so these are just, I guess, just for information purposes, unless there was something on here that people wanted to add, we could take note of that.
I'm slightly biased, but I do like disc golf. Yeah.
Yeah, takes up a lot of space, and it's so much fun.
Now, question to you then, Matthew. If you like, would disc golf course anywhere in the city be compromised? Like, does it need to be at Mill Lake in your mind, or
No.
we just need to have one?
It's just like, if there's one at, say, Claiborne Park or something like that, yeah, I think it would at least show that people were interested, because, it was like Langley built one, and then it just blew up and, became quite a big thing, so.
It takes up a lot of
It
space.
does take up a lot of space, yeah, so it can be, it doesn't have to be.
Okay, so I'll move to the next one. So this was the balance concept, same question. This was the feedback that was received.
I really like the idea of outdoor classroom, nature education. We're doing a lot of that already with some of our not-for-profit groups, and having a location that we could go to reliably that's a little bit protected from the weather is ideal, of course, for outdoor education.
Right.
And again, the interface there with the lake and some natural planting is perfect for young kids.
I raised this issue, I don't know, through an email a few weeks ago. I don't know who I sent it to. It may have been to Peter. But I didn't like the terminology removing with ball diamonds. I prefer the term relocating, because there was some social media traffic, and a lot of people were really ticked off that we're going to remove ball diamonds. And the idea is to relocate them, not to remove them.
Yeah, through the chair, we did think about how to word things to be transparent and clear. I think we were using language around kind of like this redeployment idea earlier on in the discussion. And we really thought about how that idea might get conveyed in a confusing way to the general public. So we wanted to just be really clear about, but you're right, it's removing it potentially from the park,
Yes.
but not from the community. And that was a bit of a challenging message to convey. And I think we did some work on the website to try and make that clearer, once we were sort of learning that this was something that was really going to be triggering to people.
Or how about remove and relocate as a phrase? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with that is that, we might, for something like the pool, we might, through these strategies, we're going to get more direction, either the sport, field, and court strategy, as well as the aquatic strategy. We're going to get more direction as to what that means. And so I guess the thought was, in some cases, things might not be relocated,
Right.
depending on what those strategies are telling us. So it was a bit of a challenge to communicate that.
Yeah, I would just articulate it to a pretty strong point of emphasis in all the public consultation and the meetings and emails we've gotten and phone calls, just to remind everybody that doesn't mean that asset goes away, right? It might be considered under another plan, right? It might be considered through a strategy that we're working on. But it is a difficult message to get across with all of the kind of changes and all of the kind of plans we have in parallel between pools and fields and whatnot. So.
And then the final one, as far as favorite elements of concept 3, and those ones are there.
In regards to the removing of things, that's the same thing, I think, with the lawn bowling club and horseshoe club too, right? There's a couple of concepts there where they have been removed off of the map, but I'm thinking that in actuality, they're probably relocating.
Right.
Yes, and that has been the discussion with each of those groups and beyond, with other stakeholders that kind of have a footprint in the park, so to speak.
Well, could I just interject there? So just a suggestion for future communication, perhaps you keep that language in the body, but that there's footnoting, that somewhere the reader is directed to a footnote that says, oh, but this, here are some,
So we did do that when we
Yeah.
started getting this feedback. So we
Okay.
did do that both on the project page. We had a very large, bold insert to kind of explain, when things are shown as removed, it means that they're being looked at in conjunction with these broader strategies. And then we did sort of footnote that when we were speaking with sort of all of the various user groups and replying to email. But yeah, perhaps on the plans themselves, could have added that up in the beginning.
John?
So in terms of the concept 3, the passive plan, which of course would be wonderful, but not very realistic in terms of the usage of the park. One of the things that Todd was saying earlier, that we're talking about 10, 20 years of visioning for this area. One of the things that we might want to consider within the plan is not closing the door on possibilities for future connectivity. A good example is like the Fish Trap Creek connection to the lake. There is potential there in the long term to do some daylighting and do some habitat and corridor connectivity with Fish Trap Creek. Fish Trap Creek right now is a very, very isolated and collapsing, tiny little environmental area. But it could, if there was more connectivity to the lake in the long term, then that we might be able to revive that. That's fish habitat. There's all kinds of different things going on there. The lake at one time, well, it's been probably over 100 years since that lake has had any real significant environmental value. But that's not to say that it couldn't have value in the future. It could be, there are ways to do that. And cities have done that. Burnaby has done it. That's a good example. And perhaps, I'm not saying that we can afford to do these sorts of things or even consider how that would practically happen, but we shouldn't close the door on the possibility. So if there's a potential corridor, we should make sure that that we keep that in mind and don't close the door on that.
So Ravine Park, not Fish, right?
Sorry, Ravine Park. Fish Trap. I got it wrong. Ravine Park.
Oh, yeah, I was trying
I was
Yeah,
visualize.
sorry.
trying to map it out.
Well, I was thinking about, I was thinking about the viewing platform on Fish Trap Creek, and I was gonna say something about that, how well that works, right? Even though it doesn't have, it's not a walkthrough.
Right.
Sorry, that was in my head, Ravine Park. I'm sorry, Todd.
A bridge too far.
So Ravine
okay.
Park, connectivity to Mill Lake
Yeah.
is something that we
Yeah.
should keep in mind. As, who knows, 20 years from now, it might be possible. And if that were the case, then it's something that we maybe should keep in mind.
Because there's salmon in the ravine.
Yeah, well, yeah, and we had a good discussion with our nature club because we hold our meetings there at the hatchery.
Okay.
Right? And so we had a good discussion about this at our last meeting, and everybody thought, wouldn't it be great if? And I said, well, it's extremely unlikely, but let's not make it impossible. Okay? Yeah. That's from the nature club. So.
Yeah, good point. Christine, your hand up?
There we go. The connectivity that John's talking about I think is really interesting. It was something that we identified when we were having the stakeholder meetings for the downtown core in the process of coming up with a new OCP and all of that. And that was something that all of the groups in the room at the time agreed with, that they wanted, was to connect that corridor from Mill Lake through Ravine Park into the downtown core, and then connecting it up to where the old Claiborne brick factory used to be on Pine Street and all that. down through so that you could eventually, at some point in the future, way down the road, nonetheless, connect it to Wilband Creek. So the original flow in and out of this lake would come from the Nooksack River up to Laxton Lake up to Mill Lake, and Mill Lake to Ravine Park, and then up that way. And then there's another offshoot that used to go into Sumas Lake, where it would then connect to the Nooksack and the Fraser River again. So that, yeah, the draining of the lake really put an end to that, right? But we do know that there's a want for that from our visitors here at the park, but also from the stakeholder meetings for the downtown.
Yeah.
Thomas, your hand's up, I see.
Yes, thanks. I didn't see any of these things that we liked in the ones here, but I'm also a big fan of the dog off leash area. That's definitely a good. I think that's in all three of them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Great.
Well, it's okay. We're just in a couple of weeks we're hosting an event in Mission called Salmon in the City, and we restored some streams in Mission, in the urban areas in Mission that were completely destroyed, and we rebuilt them, and we've got salmon spawning, and it's wonderful. So we've got the mayor coming and everybody, and it's going to be, but maybe 20 years from now we could do that at Mill Lake, which would be fun.
Go ahead.
So as far as asking the question of was there a clear preference for anyone on one of the plans, and there, maybe not surprisingly, because I think we've established it's probably going to be a hybrid in the end, but there were no strong preferences on any one of the concept plans. I think people kind of like elements of various parts of them all. And then concerns with the concept plans. So were there any significant concerns people had with any of these plans? And so these were the comments received. And
We'll just add the disc golf. Like I think John mentioned, the one in Langley is actually getting like international coverage right now. People come from all around like North America to come play there, so it is a big deal.
I'm not sure. Am I seeing a hand there on the screen? No? No, okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, the whole pickleball phenomenon.
Yeah.
I expect we're going to see more and more and more of it. I think it's weird in a way, but it's definitely catching on. Yeah.
so I think pickleball came up actually in the next question we asked about, or maybe in the following question. But this is now these are comments about what people liked most about the concept plans.
Right. Yeah.
Most liked. There are 2 slides on this one, so I'll pause here for a moment and then I'll click to the next slide. Largely things we've already discussed. And then on the next slide. So I don't know, any further thoughts on most liked parts of the plans or something we feel might be missing from here?
Just the one thing on enhanced gardens. We also had a discussion about the heritage garden area, the natural heritage garden that it's struggling.
I think that's what this is referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then moving on.
Actually, one question.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Does that I don't see in here any of the new tailings to improve the quality of the water? That should be in all of them as well too. Obviously the water quality, if we're gonna people use it as a beach, having the water quality higher will get better usage out of that, I think.
Okay, question. Beach. I was wondering the same thing. When staff proposed to determine, a beach, were they thinking beach in terms of a place where people come to swim, or were they thinking a beach in terms of simply the water's edge in a place? Yeah. So Thomas, I don't know if that's where you're going as a swimming outlet, because I don't think that is in the plans, and I don't think we as council are advancing that idea.
Okay, yeah, no, I just saw on the other one we have tailing, like a new water tailings. So I don't know how much that would actually increase the quality of water. But if the plan is no one actually can swim there or use it as a beach, I see it's mostly used as a platform for kayakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I could just speak to the thought, I guess, around the expanded beach area, there was interest from people to, I guess, have, if you think about some more urban settings where you have, knowing that we have a city center neighborhood plan, it's, some people like the idea of having sort of like a beach area. You know, you could do sandcastle kind of stuff. You could, you know, perhaps play beach volleyball. You could just lay in the sun. But with respect to the water quality, yeah, we did get I did get some feedback through either email and also on the project page about, you know, questioning like, will this plan enable us to allow the lake quality to be at a level where people could swim? And really, probably within the scope of this plan, it's not feasible to do that. We're certainly looking at opportunities to improve the lake water quality, but knowing that this lake is fed primarily by, you know, more than 10 stormwater outfalls, it gets really challenging to improve the lake water quality to a point where it would be suitable for human use.
And then sort of with the beach, like I probably won't go sunbathing right now just because there's so many geese.
Yeah.
Is there sort of that worked into the plan?
Yeah, so geese control is something that comes up very regularly, and I mean, there is a current management program, and I think that what this master plan allows us, it's not something we're discussing through because it's not one of the big, you know, but it certainly falls in sort of the line of enhancing the environmental kind of conditions around the lake. And so wildlife management is, I think this gives us an opportunity to kind of explore how we are managing it. Are there other management practices that we can investigate, that we can employ here? The challenge with the geese is that we could, you know, actually, you know, get rid of all of them tomorrow, but it's sort of a carrying capacity thing. Geese will fly and see, oh, great, a nice, lovely place for me to land. And so it'll just, like, it's not really something we can eliminate entirely. It's going to be an ongoing management process, but there's certainly, you know, perhaps different ways we can, maybe there's new ways to manage that. So we will be looking into that with this process.
And that's very much a system-wide issue for us. I mean, Mill Lake Park, obviously with its high usage, we hear a lot about it, but we certainly hear at other sites as well. So sports fields and ball diamonds and pathways throughout the network.
It's like Walmsley Lake. It's, you know, there's a couple sort of duck Canadian geese families, and it's not overrun like that one little beach. Like it, yeah.
Christine, is your hand up?
Yes, I was just going to say, like, as the person who works here and where we walk here quite often, we don't very often get ducks and geese and stuff all the way up to the heritage site. But what I would really like to see figured out, set up a little bit better, would be all the, you know, we got franken ducks and franken geese and franken fish, right? So we've got people releasing their goldfish into the lake, and then they interbreed with something, and you pull something out that's supposed to be, I don't know, a minnow, and it comes out gold colored. And we've got these like really weird interbred species. I think maybe a bigger focus on actually pushing the indigenous species that are supposed to be here, and that includes the endangered frogs and turtles. And I'm sure, you know, if we're going to keep stocking the lake, it would probably be better if we could get on top of people releasing their pets into the park. You should see the number of rabbits we've had this year. I have never seen so many rabbits, and that's partially because people are releasing their pets into the park. But that's a bylaw issue, right? So anyhow, 2 cents.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next question we looked at is if you could see one new thing. So maybe something that hadn't been presented in the 3 concept plans, what would it be? And there were 2 responses here. And Next question was similar but different, if you could retain one element. So if you were given the opportunity to veto a decision and retain one element of the park, what would it be? And these were the responses I received. And then these were just general comments. So I think we're pretty much the end of the comments received through that survey. So I guess opportunity for any further thoughts and comments or questions at this point.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So all of the plans seem to revolve around removing ball diamonds. And I know that there's talk about relocation, possibly. I was surprised that there weren't any options available to keep the ball diamonds. They all seem to be removing. So I guess the question is there a discussion happening where there's a facility or a strategy, like a diamond sports strategy, similar to like if we remove the pool, that would be tied to an aquatic strategy? Is there a diamond sports strategy?
So through the chair, in concept one, maybe I'll just go back there. In the first concept, the two diamonds sort of on the Emerson Road side are retained in that scenario. In all three, the one sort of in the north of the park where the parking lot is, in all three, that one is shown as being removed. But in the first concept, we do show those two diamonds on Emerson being retained. But to answer the second part of your question, much like the aquatic strategy, we do have on our near future work plan to do a sport field and court strategy. So sporting fields and court strategy.
Yeah, maybe just for clarity, near future is 2024.
Yeah.
Right, that's in our 5-year work plan. And we've talked to each of the organizations that use those ball diamonds about that opportunity. Acknowledging that, hey, you're using the diamond right now, maybe for universal awareness, the two in the northwest corner get used about 4 times as much as the one in kind of north central. So there's a significant, I think it's pretty obvious if you're in kind of that sporting world, some significant synergies with having the two diamonds together. I think we see that across the system as most kind of the one orphan diamond, so to speak. So yeah, it's definitely a topic of kind of discussion with each of those groups, and we've kind of made the commitment that you will be heavily involved, as all stakeholders will be, in that sport field and sport court strategy. So.
And so that brings us to the end of kind of delivering back to you what we heard from you from that, at least the survey, and then thank you for all additional comments received at this. And I guess just one more call for any kind of comments or questions or feedback you'd like to convey as part of this stage 2 process.
Question, Alyssa. So will this plan at any point in the future, before it gets final approval, come back to this table? Or is this it?
Yes.
Oh, this is it?
No, sorry, it'll come back to this table.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right.
I knew what Ms. Price meant,
Yeah.
so yeah, we would plan to bring it back in the next stage, right?
Okay.
So once we kind of have that, that next draft of options, we'd be seeking to re-engage with this committee.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Any last questions or comments on this item?
I actually have one question here for you.
Yes.
When you guys decided, or when you guys came up with like disc golf, or I saw pickleball, did you guys reach out to the community to ask kind of what sport they're most interested in having, or did you guys just come up with one?
So through the chair, stage 1 of this process was heavy in public consultation. So there were many in-person events. There was a survey similar to this one. So we did go through an extensive sort of public engagement process in stage 1, which formed the findings when we came to council with sort of background research and key findings. So the ideas that we're presenting in these 3 concept plans are really based on the ideas we most predominantly heard in that stage 1.
Okay. Cool.
And maybe just to touch on the pickleball piece, outside of this plan, we have engaged with them. They've recently formed an association, put together a bit of a strategy of their own. I think it's a fair reflection to say that they're focused on some indoor spaces for kind of that the poor weather season that we're entering into, and kind of a high volume of courts. think just to kind of contextualize it, they're looking for like 8, 10, 12 courts as opposed to 2, 4, 6 courts. They weren't really location fixed at that point in time in that discussion. So, but again, they're welcome to kind of contribute into this process as well. And just, I'm not sure based on that initial discussion that they'd be too concerned about where it was located. They're just more looking at, the volume of courts, so to speak.
Okay, and sorry, what association? There's a pickleball association that's doing that?
Yes, yeah, the Abbotsford
Oh, okay.
Pickleball Association.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Melissa. And is there any new business that anyone wishes to put on the table? If not, then I would welcome or entertain a motion to adjourn. Mike, Matthew?
Yeah.
Seconded by John. We're all in favor, I'm sure, and we are adjourned. Thanks very much,